Help me to clean my room.
Shalom. Welcome to Mishpachah. Mishpachah is the Hebrew word for family. I'm Debbie Good, your hostess, and many times I share my family with you. This time I am alone, but we will still share some things that we do in our home for special events, for every day, or just various times of the year. You know, the last time we had talked about preparation of the fall or after the fall holidays, getting ready for the great American holiday, Thanksgiving Day. We talked a little bit about the hardships faced by the early Americans as they came over to the new land and some of their aspirations, their dreams, like I said, the hardships they had faced in that first winter. You know, my husband Joe and I believe that the first Thanksgiving was actually a celebration, a rejoicing that they had survived the harsh winter conditions and that they had looked back upon Scripture to express thanksgiving in a way that mirrored the great harvest festival of the Bible, that being Sukkot. As a matter of fact, we know that they were not able to have their meal indoors because there were so many of them in attendance. Nobody had a hall big enough. And so in many respects, this particular festival resembled the festival of Sukkot. Therefore, we really like the festival, the American festival of Thanksgiving, in addition to some of the other holidays, but we feel that because it was based upon biblical principles, it's something that certainly we should observe and take part in. Now, there is a little bit of a problem. You see, Thanksgiving obviously was originally a Christian holiday. The Pilgrims, the Puritans, the Quakers, all of the ones who first settled in the land were giving Thanksgiving for their Christian principles of expanding the gospel. Therefore, you're not going to see a lot of Thanksgiving recipes in Jewish cookbooks. Now, many Jews do celebrate Thanksgiving, obviously, because there's nothing wrong with the festival. But if you start to cook a traditional Thanksgiving dinner, there's going to be a few problems associated with it. We felt that because of these unique problems, it might be a good time to address the question of kashrut, or the laws, the kosher dietary laws regarding the mixing of meat and dairy. You know, Jewish law is going to prohibit mixing these two items. As a matter of fact, and I have some sources handy with me if you want to make note of these, there are 3 places where it is written about the dairy meat mixtures. For example, and I am, by the way, reading out of the first Jewish catalog. I've used this book a number of times before on this program. And this is found on page 19 regarding kashrut and the dietary laws. First of all, we're told that the life of the flesh is in the blood. You know, we're restricted from eating any blood. Since blood is the life, we're forbidden to eat the blood. Remember, even the eggs we must check to make sure that they have no spots of blood in them. Through the process of kashering, the blood must be removed from the animal before eating the meat. This is why the animals are killed in a specific way. Generally, their necks are cut so that all the blood can be drained from the animal. As a matter of fact, even poultry is prepared in this way. As a matter of fact, with cattle and sheep, we do not eat certain parts of the animal, such as the hindquarters, because it's so difficult to remove some of the veins and the nerves from this part of the animal. And then here comes a great restriction on mixing of dairy and meat. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. Now, a lot of people feel like, well, okay, you're not supposed to prepare an animal in its own mother's milk. But there are 3 examples in Scripture of this: Exodus 23:19, Exodus 34:26, and Deuteronomy 14:21. It is stated and restated. In other words, it's stated 3 times. Most of the dietary laws, as far as what foods may be eaten and not eaten, are listed twice. This one actually is listed 3 times. And it is restated because of the basic cruelty involved in combining the life-giving element of an animal, or its milk, with the death element, its flesh. And, of course, over time this meant that, not only were you not supposed to boil meat in milk, but actually, because boiling has to do with preparation, it is forbidden even to prepare the 2 things together. Now, fish is a little bit different. You see, fish, of course, Fish have a circulatory system. They are vertebrate animals. They have a spine. But the same laws for capturing them do not exist as for the other animals. As a matter of fact, all you have to do there is to remove the insides. It's considered kosher. Chickens, poultry, turkey, any type of fowl, and cattle, sheep, goats, beef, anything like this, must, however, have the arteries cut in such a way that all the blood can be drained. As a matter of fact, if you want to eat the liver from any of these animals, it is considered kosher, but only if the liver is broiled first. Because remember, this is an internal organ. And so you must have it broiled in such a way that all the blood will drain from underneath the meat. All right, so let's get back to Thanksgiving dinner. One of the immediate problems we face, let's say you get a kosher turkey, and you're going to have some cornbread dressing, sweet potato casserole, cranberries, the whole works. And, all of a sudden you realize that just buying the kosher turkey isn't enough. You see, that means that the animal is kosher, but you have to watch how you prepare it also. If you purchase a turkey that is kosher and packaged up frozen, it has been salted and cashered, and you do not have to do anything else to it except, of course, wash it, but you do not have to let it sit and soak in a salt mixture to drain the blood from it. Anything that's been frozen like this from a kosher butcher should already have that taken care of. But one thing I found out very quickly is in making a dressing for the turkey, you have to watch that it not have dairy in it. And this, of course, can present a few problems. Because of this, we're going to put together a Thanksgiving dressing. Now, I don't have the turkey here, so we're not going to do this exactly as we would Thanksgiving Day, but we're going to try to come as close to it as possible. So I'm going to remove my jewelry, just because I don't like to fool around in the kitchen very much with my jewelry on. And let's see if I can stick them in a pocket. And we'll get started on mixing up a dressing for Thanksgiving. Okay, basically to make a basic cornbread dressing, basic cornbread to start with, we take about 1.5 cups of cornmeal. And mix with that about 1 cup of regular flour. White flour will do. And I like to mix all of my dry ingredients first, just to make sure that they are just gathered in together, mixed equally, so that by the time we add the liquid ingredients, everything is blended well. As a matter of fact, I'm going to move to a larger bowl. Here we go. Now this is 1.5 cups cornmeal, 1 cup flour. There we go. And we're going to add to that about 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder. And then on top of that, let's see, we'll put in 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Let me get some of this out of the way and go ahead and mix some of that in. It does not have to be sifted, of course. I'm going to add 1/4 cup of sugar, because we like sweet cornbread. And then we'll start to mix our liquid ingredients. Okay. I usually put 2 eggs in my corn because it will help them to rise nice and fluffy, and then just beat them up. So 2 eggs, beat up a little bit, about 1/4 cup of oil, regular vegetable oil. And then here's where we get a little bit different. Most recipes, you could use a normal, regular cornbread recipe that comes off the side of the box. But most of them are going to call for milk or buttermilk or cream to be added to them. What I usually have done in the past is I take the same amount, about 1 cup of liquid, but this is chicken broth. Now you can use it straight from the chicken drippings. You can use a bouillon cube or a powder, or even the can. But I take 1 cup of chicken broth and add to that. And by the way, one of the reasons why I use a chicken broth, and I'll show you which kind I use later, is that it seems to have a little bit less of a weight, situation to it. A lot of people who are dieting will use chicken broth for a lot of things they normally would use milk or cream in. All right, so we mix this together. Now, if you can try this with 1 egg, or like I said, just follow a normal recipe for cornbread. I usually put 2 eggs because it just makes it a little bit wetter. But we mix all of this in together. And then you grease a casserole dish, a round pan, or some people would use a frying pan, whatever you usually make your cornbread in, but grease it real nice and put it in an oven at 400 degrees and bake it for about 20 to 25 minutes. And of course, what you'll want to do is make sure that it springs back at you when it is done. Now, getting back to the preparation of the liquid, there are some options you have, some things you can try. And by the way, this will also apply to the dressing that we put together. So let's pretend that we've put our cornbread in the oven. Let me get it out of the way. Now, what I use for this particular recipe is a type of bouillon cube. These are kosher, by the way. This has meat in it. This is put out by Telma. It's a chicken consomme. And usually it's just like any type of a bouillon, 1 cup to 1 cube. They usually come in a package of 3. It's just a nice little thing to have on hand. But it is a meat item. You cannot use this with dairy foods that you would prepare. But this is what I use for this particular recipe. I have also used something like this. This is put up by Carmel Kosher. This is a soup-based chicken style. And this, by the way, is parve, meaning that you can use it with dairy products or with meat. It has neither meat or dairy in it. It's chicken flavor, but it does not have meat in it. By the way, this is very nice to use for, say, a cream of potato soup to put a little bit of flavor, chicken flavor in it, and give it just a little bit of a little more depth to a creamy type soup, because you can use it with dairy. So this would be a possibility. And this is about a teaspoon to a cup of water. Now, the other option, a lot of my friends, and actually Joe's mother, will use this. It's a type of non-dairy cream. You can use this instead of the chicken broth. I've just used the chicken broth for years, and so I keep doing it. But this particular one is mocha mixed. By the way, this is not chocolate. And let me pour a little bit out for you. We've used this before. One time we made some pumpkin soup. You can see that this is not chocolate, so don't be fooled by the mocha name. But see, it just looks like cream. It even pours out like cream. This, by the way, not only is kosher, but it's parev or parve also, meaning that you can use this in dairy or actually in meat dishes. This is not the only brand. There's also Coffee Rich. There are also some kosher brands that, this you can find in almost any type of a grocery store, or the Coffee Rich you can find in almost any grocery store. Some of the other brands put out by, for example, the Jewish companies, you might have difficulty in finding. But this is a possibility if you like a milkier or a creamier type of cornbread. Now, in mixing the dressing, let me take my glasses off for a minute. We'll get started on what we do. Let's say the cornbread's come out of the oven. You'll want it to cool down for a little while. And then you take cornbread and just crumple it up in a bowl. Most of you probably do this your own way at home. I left a little bit left, but see, it still makes a nice, even with that chicken broth in there, it makes a nice full-bodied cornbread. And just crumple it up. And we're going to add to that 4 cups of dried out breadcrumbs. Now, here's another problem. These are the breadcrumbs I'm using. You want to make sure you can't just go out and buy breadcrumbs most of the time, because so many of them have dairy in them. As a matter of fact, most breads will have dairy. You can take certain loaves of bread that are available on the market today that are kosher and parve. By the way, one of the reasons why most bread is not considered kosher is because of the dairy products that are in them. Anyway, we'll mix these two together and just start to get almost an overflowing amount of breadcrumbs and cornbread. Now, what did I do to get my breadcrumbs? I brought this from home. This, by the way, is challah. I found out several years ago when making dressing that, when I couldn't just use regular bread, decided the easiest way is to just use challah. So I made all this challah for Thanksgiving dinner. And this year, actually in preparation for this program and in preparation for our own Thanksgiving, I'll take the challah that's left over from each week, let it dry out a little bit, break it up, stick it in the bag, and then we freeze it. And of course, we can keep freezing. You don't want to freeze it again after it's thawed out, but it is dried, it is bread, and you don't have to worry about the ingredients in it. Okay, so we've got those things mixed together. And now you know how to prepare for your breadcrumbs at home. We're going to add to that about a cup of chopped celery. And celery, by the way, is one of the things that's going to make dressing taste so nice. Celery and poultry mixed together very, very well. And I'm running out of room in this bowl. There's just so much. And then we like to add about a half a cup of onion. You might want to use a little bit more than that. A nice medium-sized onion should be enough, but just depending on how much flavor you like. And notice that I did not saute these ahead of time. So, you know, we're going to be baking the dressing for quite a while so that these vegetables can cook. All right, now having done all of this, we're going to start adding in the seasonings. Let's see, we're going to put in a little bit of salt to taste. And here, let me speak briefly to you about using the bouillon cubes or a soup base. You know, later on we're going to be adding some broth. And if you're using broth that's made from one of these, you might want to watch the salt, because sometimes bouillon, consommé, or canned soups can have an awful lot of salt in them. So you might want to save the salting for later. On the other hand, we do like a lot of pepper in our food. So, you know, salt and pepper to taste. I said about a teaspoon of pepper. And then we go to our chicken dry seasoning. What we're going to use here is 3/4 a teaspoon of poultry seasoning. It's 3/4. And then it's optional. You do not have to do this, but about a teaspoon of sage. Now you might wonder, why put sage and poultry seasoning, since poultry seasoning basically is sage with just a little bit more, and that's true. But if you like to have something with a little more sage in it, this would be a good opportunity to do it, but you don't want to put in more than a teaspoon, because you have too much sage and it can actually ruin your dressing. There are other ways to flavor it rather than just using the sage or poultry seasoning. So about 1.5 teaspoons of poultry seasoning, and then a teaspoon, actually, let's see, I have 3/4 a teaspoon poultry seasoning. It's 3/4 teaspoon poultry seasoning and 1 teaspoon of sage. And the reason I get this wrong is I usually do this recipe up double. Our family is large, and we like our dressing. Now take our eggs, and I'm going to mix it with, I'm just going to stir it up a little bit. Let me get my whisk out. Take 2 eggs and just blend them up a little bit. And pour them into the mixture. And then we're going to add anywhere from about 3 to 4 cups of warmed chicken stock. Now ordinarily at home, I would do this several ways. I would first of all take probably some of the juice from the turkey, maybe some of the broth from boiling the neck, probably some, you know, maybe even a can of turkey stock. But since we didn't actually have the bird with us here today, I just used regular bouillon. But I would probably, you know, as I said, use some of the liquid that came off the bird. And we want to have a nice moist mixture. So, like I said, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 4 cups. Basically, just add liquid until you get a nice moist consistency. And again, the consommé cubes come in handy whenever you need more liquid. For example, if you want to make some dumplings later on, or save some of your broth for, you know, for example, I like to save some of my broth a couple of days down the road. I like to make a kosher type of gumbo. And so I like some of that broth handy. So I don't like to just use it all in my dressing. So the bouillon cubes will come in handy. Now some recipes for dressing will also call for milk. And remember, you can't mix milk with it in order to keep it kosher. So you might use a substitute, or to use one of the broths. Anyway, get this nice and wet. And of course, usually what I do at home is I just get my hands in it. Almost like a meatloaf. You just squish it around. But right now we just want to moisten it up, and I'll go ahead and add just the rest of this broth because we used a whole cornmeal on this. And mix all of this together. Set your oven to about 400 degrees. You might want to set a little bit less, especially if you live in, down where we are, maybe anywhere from about 350, 375. Usually, I think I bake most everything in about 350. So get this, all stirred in, mixed together. Take a nice sized dish, grease it or spray it with a spray. There we go. So that it won't stick. And let me dish some of this out. Basically spread it out into a nice little casserole and let this bake for approximately an hour. It takes a long time, but remember those vegetables were not cooked. We want the dressing to be done. We don't want it to be too dried out. So, like I said, you want to make sure that it's moist throughout. And normally you would probably want to use some of the juice from the bird itself, some of the broth, or either from boiling the neck or just for the gravy that comes off the bottom of the turkey. So get all of that out. And cornbread dressing truly is one of my favorites. Like I said, it's hard to find in a kosher cookbook, and this is one of the reasons why. Because of the dairy restrictions. It's very difficult to find cornbread that does not have dairy in it. And then some people like to put dairy in their dressing also to make it creamier, which of course we don't do. And of course, oyster dressing is not even a consideration. Never has been a consideration in our family. So spread this out evenly, and like I said, about 350 degrees, and we're going to set this in for about an hour. You might want to check it after 45 minutes just to make sure that it's getting done. It could be done a little bit earlier. Anyway, this should take care of most of your needs for Thanksgiving as far as keeping kashrut. Now, you may or you may not observe some of these customs as far as the things you eat, as far as keeping away from unclean animals. And some people might want to stay away from unclean animals, but they do not follow the rest of kashrut as far as purchasing kosher meat or the mixing of dairy and meat. The thing is, I'm not here right now to tell you what you should or should not do. The thing is, whether you do these things or whether you do not do them, you should at least understand what it means for something to be kosher or not kosher. You can make a decision later on if you want to change or you can always decide to go one way or the other. But at first, you should have an understanding of what it means. And of course, by all means, you should have an understanding if somebody is in your family or if you have a close friend who is trying to observe the dietary laws. You need to understand what they're going through so that you do not tempt them with something that they ordinarily would not eat. I learned a long time ago that if you want to explain something to somebody, first you need to understand it. And how can you understand it unless you've truly experienced it? So I'd want to encourage everyone to try to do something different this Thanksgiving and try to keep within the restrictions, the dietary restrictions of kashrut, whether you intend to do this long term or not. I think it's just a nice thing for you to experience so that you can understand it a little bit better. And like I said, there is a little bit of contention sometimes over the mixing of meat and dairy, but let me give you one important fact that came into prominence just a few years ago. The Biblical Archaeological Review, the magazine BAR, we refer to it, B-A-R, Biblical Archaeology Review, produced several articles, very prominent articles, about some dishes that had been found in Jerusalem. The dishes dated back, I've got this written, that were dated back from the early Second Temple period. Now that means about the time of Nehemiah. These dishes were labeled for meat or dairy, or in other words, there was clearly separation of the dishes even back during that time, which we figure is about 500 before the Common Era. If they were doing this even before the time of Yeshua, how much more should we consider doing something like this now? It's a very, very important idea. Anyway, hope that you can enjoy a very, very good Thanksgiving with your family, with your Mishpachah. I know I'm looking forward to seeing my family celebrate the festival of Thanksgiving. But remember always that although we have our own families, we're all part of a much greater Mishpachah, or a much greater family in the kingdom of God. Shalom.